The new Imaginaries for a Critical Humanities Project on Gender and Sexual Justice is a 5-year Andrew W. Mellon funded project housed in the Women's and Gender Studies Department, Faculty of Arts and Humanities, University of the Western Cape. I am Tamara Shefer, professor in the department, and I work together with a group of scholars, postgraduates, postdocs, and colleagues in and outside the university on this project that is primarily directed at challenging dominant forms of scholarship and pedagogies related to sexualities and gender, particularly as shaped by the last few decades of responses to high rates of HIV and gender-based violence. The project is focused on 3 intersecting areas. Firstly, a critique of dominant local research on sexuality and gender justice, drawing attention to the problematic ways in which this body of research has served to rationalize and reproduce dominant discourses and power relations. Not only has it reinscribed binary gender and stereotypic gender roles, it has also and more implicitly bolstered racist, classist, and global othering. In response, the project hopes to generate scholarship and practice that challenges such normative research and pedagogy, calling into question the authority of the researcher and teacher, and current colonial and patriarchal logics that dominate in the academy. Thirdly, the project troubles the divides between different forms of knowledges and the privileges of particular knowledges, in particular academic knowledge, to work collaboratively with artistic and activist knowledges in affective and embodied ways towards gender and sexual justice. Thus, many of our activities so far have included collaborations towards creating an archival and exhibitionary space for forms of activism, performance, art, and scholarship that disrupt and destabilize everyday gender and sexual injustices, with our larger goal being to contribute to or co-create a feminist South African museum.
Hello, I'm Carmen Rustin, and I'm a lecturer in the Women's and Gender Studies Department at the University of the Western Cape. I'm currently attached to the new Imaginaries Project as researcher and formerly as a postdoc. Since its inception, the project has collaborated with a number of artists, scholars, activists, locally and internationally, to give effect to the project goals. One such event was a 2-day colloquium, which was a celebration of art, activism, and scholarship towards gender and sexual justice. The colloquium included the film screening of Ntabiseng Mokoena and Gabrielle Leroux's award-winning film Reclaiming Intersex While Black, Genderqueer and Feminist in South Africa, and the 10-year anniversary of the art exhibition Proudly African and Transgender, portrait drawings of 10 trans activists from East and Southern Africa, drawn from life by Gabrielle and written onto by the participating activists. The new Imaginaries Project has also showcased the work of 30 students registered for the research module in the Women's and Gender Studies Department. The photo voice exhibition centered on documenting forms of everyday activism and resistance that address gender and sexual injustices and inequalities. But most certainly one of the highlights of the project has been a collaboration with the Sex Worker Education and Advocacy Task Force, SWET, which included an exhibition entitled A Likeness Embodied, Representations of Sex Work, in addition to a play performed by the Sex Worker Theatre Group. The works showed various representations of sex workers, often challenging negative and damaging stereotypes, and articulating sex workers' agency, including the clear call for decriminalization. Lastly, and most recently, the project co-hosted a number of international scholars whose work has been closely aligned with that of the new Imaginaries Project.
My PhD research looks at intersectional understandings of Black university students' challenges to successful graduation in higher education. There has been much debate and much research on social transformation and the high level of dropout rates in South African universities. However, there remains a need for research that prioritizes the narratives of Black students. Most research and findings brought forward often fail to account for the racial composition of youth who do not graduate. And therefore, this study will offer an opportunity to document Black students' experiences of their identity and link their experiences to the broader debate on social transformation in South African universities. This study seeks to understand how the challenges experienced to their identity affected their inability to graduate. The dominant narrative about dropout rates often blames young people and paints them as incompetent. However, the findings of this study will bring new insights to external challenges that cause young people not to finish their degrees. The theoretical framework utilized by the study is the decolonial feminist theory. This is because the education in South Africa is colonial in its roots, and therefore any theoretical framework that would have been utilized by the study needed to take coloniality very seriously. I utilize feminist research methodologies for the study, and lastly, I am interviewing 10 Black students, 5 male students, 5 female students using in depth qualitative interviews.
Tandurim Sevenzi, and I'm a fine artist doing my master's at UWC. So in 2017, I created a body of work titled Awundiboni. In this body of work, I dealt with rape culture and the silence around rape culture. And I was with this work for a period of 2 years where I traveled with it. It was an exhibition, I was in talks, and I was really inspired by how people were engaging with this work and how impactful the work was to them. And I knew that I had to study gender studies a bit further. So in 2018, I started looking for a school, and speaking to my friend, I told my friend that, you know what, I want to do my master's in gender studies, but I'm really not an academic person. I'm a very visual person. I prefer the visual mode, visual method of inquiry. And my friend told me about what was happening in UWC at Women Gender Studies and new Imaginaries, and I thought, you know what, I like this, I'm gonna go for it. So I started my master's in 2018 at UWC, at Women and Gender Studies, where I learned a little bit more about new Imaginaries. And in that year, I knew and I always wanted to do a visual body of work. So I spent that year creating a body of work, and I spent 2 years on the visual body of work that I created, and I was funded by the new Imaginaries Project to then create an exhibition. And I had the exhibition in 2019. So I'm going to share with you that body of work in slides, and I'll talk a bit about the work while I share with you the slides. Thank you.
So this photograph is titled Utata Undipota Inwele, My Father Plats My Hair. This title is also the title of the body of work and was the title of the show. So this photograph really marks the beginning of my project. I was inspired by how my father used to plait my hair every evening before I went to school. And this was an extraordinary act, coming from a very violent community and having this very soft men in my life and also other soft men in my family. Same house, I was raised by a very strong grandmother. My grandmother fought her way through everything. She always carried weapons and she always encouraged us to carry knives. So the stories that I explore in this body of work really start to engage with the different ways in which growing up I was witnessing different genders playing roles that aren't expected of them, especially coming from a very violent community where women were abused. These next three photographs are a triptych titled Egwaveni. This is a game we used to play when we were young, and I really think we were navigating our identities and really taking up space. So every time we saw men as children, we used to touch our vaginas and say Egwaveni. And it was always interesting for me as a child witnessing how shy men got when we claimed our bodies and we touched our vaginas. Look back at this game, as kids, whether we were aware of this or not, we were actually resisting, and claiming our bodies, we were almost creating a shield and guarding ourselves. So this picture is titled Iguava Ehlabayo, meaning this guava is spiky. In the process of creating this project, the friend who was assisting me told me that his mom hides weapons under her bed as a form of protection should anything happen to her. And this shook me because I always thought that was only the women in my family who always carried weapons and who hid weapons under their beds as a way of protecting themselves. So I had to go and I had to photograph this. And so, this notion of resistance and fighting back is something that continuously appears in my work where women are taking action, where women are taking weapons, and they're not being victimized. So, in the process of resistance and fighting back, there are casualties. Women do die. And whether it is emotionally or physically, we do die. And I think that's why I create. It's a way that I'm able to heal through my own traumas. I'm going to close off with this one image. This is an image of my cousin, a very, very beautiful soul, very different. And he loves birds and he keeps birds in the house. And the way they relate to him is very telling of the person that he is. So my grandmother came up to me once and was like, you know what, Tandy? I don't know how to treat your cousin. He's different. With you guys, I've always been very loud and rowdy and you got me. But with him, I have to treat him differently because he is soft and I can't treat him the way that I've treated all of you. So this has always stuck with me, how my grandmother at her old age, she feels that she has to change her behavior to raise my cousin differently because he really struggles to relate with her. So I will end it here, and the rest of this is really explored in my thesis.